Major Spoilers podcast covers news, reviews, and of course, spoilers, and goes into details about the topics discussed. So if you haven't read, listened, or watched the items we talk about, you might want to come back later.
This week on the Major Spoilers podcast, Alex Segura is here as we talk about mysteries, detectives, and writing in the genre for comic books, prose, and more. Then Matthew, Rodrigo, and I take a look at the Great British Bump-Off from Dark Horse Comics. You're listening to issue number 1119, Major Spoilers podcast. Alex Segura is a best-selling, award-winning author of Secret Identity. Dives deeply into comic book lore. He's also the author of the acclaimed Pete Fernandez series, as well as the Star Wars novel Poe Dameron Freefall. He's got a Spider-Verse YA adventure. He's also been writing some Star Wars comic books. He worked at Archie Comics and a whole lot more. This week, we're talking with Alex Segura. Alex, you probably do not realize this, but you are responsible for my current love of the detective genre.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
High praise.
Yeah, no, especially, it was years ago, you were at Archie, and you had just released your first Pete Fernandez book, and I read it, and we were messaging back and forth on Twitter, and I was just like, oh, this is really great, and you were like, hey, have you ever read Lou Archer? And I was like, I have no idea who Lou Archer is, and you're like, go read The Drowning Pool. And I did, and I became an instant addict, blew through all of the Lou Archer books that are available on Audible, and I've just been a fan of the genre ever since, finding other stuff, reading, of course, the other Pete Fernandez stories. What is it for you about Lou Archer that makes you recommend him above like Ellery Queen or some other noir detective writers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it's funny because the detectives that pulled me in right before I started writing Pete, I'd obviously read like Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and things like that. But when I started writing the Pete books, the books that were speaking to me were things like George Pelecanos' Nick Stefanos books, the Dennis Lehane, Pat and Angie, Laura Lippman's Tess Monahan books. So they were, my point being is that they were very serialized books in that the characters evolved and changed and, they were finite usually. I think Dennis has gone back and done another Pat and Angie book, but for by and large, they're done. They're complete. They're like 5 or 6 books, maybe more. So my point is that Lou Archer, that series is a little bit of an outlier, but when I read the first one, it kind of, and no disrespect to Chandler, who is a master wordsmith, but if you're looking for plot, the Marlowe books are not for you. It's really, you're there for the vibes. You're there for the language. You're there for the ride. And so I remember saying this to a friend as I started reading the Lou Archer books. I was like, oh, it's like Marlowe, but with a plot. And that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, because I think even in the first Lou Archer book, there's a little wink and a nod to Marlowe, that it's basically kind of McDonald doing a Marlowe book. But what happens with the series and what I find fascinating is that it is this commentary on the darkness of humanity. These villains are really twisted and dark and menacing. And while the Archer series is not the kind of series where you see him evolve per se, there is a momentum to it. So by the end of it, and I know McDonald was fading personally, like I think he died soon after the last book was released. You get this sense of like greater doom, like things are getting bad and things are getting worse. And, the world as a greater thing is not a great place, as a bigger thing is not a great place. So I think for me, it was like just the precision of the plotting, the colorful villains, not in a Batman 66 way, but just in, the many shades of menace, like so many bad people doing different things. I love the environmental concerns in the later books. And I love how complicated the characters are. And I like that Lou Archer, is in many ways the simplest of the characters. Like he does his thing and you're really there for the journey. And it's really influenced a lot of my own stuff. I think now that I'm saying it out loud, most particularly something like Dick Tracy, where, you love Dick Tracy. He's cool, but he's not like the most, I don't want to say not compelling, but he's not the most complicated of the characters. Like he's your doorway into this very dirty, grimy, dark, menacing world.
Yeah.
And it's almost Superman-esque. Like, he's a good guy. He stands up for what he believes in. He's true, and his aim is true, to paraphrase Costello. But he's a solid dude. But you're not there for his like nuance. You're there for the other stuff around him, and it's very similar to the Archer books in that way.
That's what I kind of like about Lou Archer is he's kind of a blank slate for the most part. You learn a little bit about, he used to be a police officer and he was married before, but you really don't learn too much about him. And unlike, well, especially the radio dramatized versions of Marlowe and others, where you're just hooking up with every beautiful woman in the story. Archer doesn't do that until we get to Blue Hammer, the last one, where he finally finds love, and it's like, oh, this is an interesting evolution of the character over that time. And I agree with you completely about we're looking at more of a psychological driven villains in this piece, and Archer and by extent Ross MacDonald trying to find that darker part of the soul through the characters in this piece. And so, I just I think I've thanked you once or twice on Twitter, but
I appreciate it.
I just need to tell you that you are the reason why I've gotten into so much detective stuff over the years.
Oh, cool.
Because for me growing up, it was Sherlock Holmes or, whatever, the current mystery of the week. Of course, I'm a huge Rockford Fans file.
Same.
But it was this one that really opened up something for me. And it really started to make me wonder what makes then a good for you, what makes a good detective story, whether that be something that you're telling in Pete Fernandez or something that you see in Lou Archer or Dick Tracy or many of the other stuff, things that you're writing right now.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny, I'm sorry, I'll get to that question in a second,
Sure.
But what's funny for me is that I'm not, I like series, but I'm not typically an episodic series reader. Like, I love the John McDonald stuff, and I love, Marlowe to me doesn't even really count as an episodic series because it's really so short. It's just five or so novels and some short stories, but as far as long-running episodic series, like Archer for me is the outlier. And I think part of it is just like the tone that McDonald creates in the world and the texture. And like you said, Archer himself is a cipher. Like, we don't really get into his head much. Yeah. But it's such a fun ride. And I'm sorry, what was the other question?
Oh, no, I was just, as we look at these and looking at Pete and Lou and others, what in your mind then makes a really good detective story?
That's a tough one. I think, it all starts with character. Like any great story, if you don't care about the character, and at least for me, and I can only speak for myself and my experience, if you don't care about the character, the rest is just vamping. I've read books that have an amazing plot that, the twists are there, all the mechanisms work, but I just don't care about the character. And that's our main job as writers, is to introduce readers to these people and their worlds and make the reader care. Like, give a crap about where you are, the world you live in, the people that are in it. And if you're just there, if it's just about some really tough guy doing tough guy things, like, I'm sure there's definitely an audience for that. And those books exist and they're fine. It just doesn't speak to me. And the books that speak to me are the ones that give me complicated people struggling to overcome their problems to become better than or worse than or just become something else. But it's the journey. And I guess for me, the Archer books are a much slower arc than, say, like the 3 Nick Stefanos books or the Derek Strange novels that Pelikanos wrote, or even Tess Monahan, which is a much longer runway. But he changes somewhat. And so for me, it's like I'm invested in this character. I care about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So a good detective story for me makes you care about the character, but also pulls you in as the detective is getting pulled in. Like, if I am not a fan of like the mundane case, like, oh, I was just going through my files and here we are and now on to the next. It's got to feel like the detective doesn't really want to do this for XYZ. It's a clue it's something from his past, or it's tapping into some kind of trauma, or or they're retired and now they're something's got to be pulling them back in, like Godfather 3 style. Like, no matter what I do, I'm still in this mess. And
I think that's what makes Pete Fernandez so interesting because, he is a investigative journalist with a past of alcoholism. And of course, that comes back in a couple of the other books.
Right.
But it's that struggle. And then I just want to be an investigative journalist. And then I keep getting drawn into this area, especially in the first book, before he goes and tries to deal with his life in the books after. But it seems that is the case where Pete stumbles upon these things. He's not out looking for it. But then again, Pete is not a detective. And I'm curious because both Pete and the main character in Secret Identity, I forget her name,
Carmen Valdez.
Yes, they're both not investigators. They stumble into this. So I'm wondering, do you have a preference for a character that is trained detective or stumbled upon detective?
Well, that's a great point, and it's also not a coincidence that the Pete series very much ends at the major spoilers, but it basically ends when he becomes a private eye. He kind of bumbles his way through 5 novels and puts himself at risk and puts his friends and family at risk. But by the time he's like, maybe I'll do this for a living, the curtain drops and the series is over. Yeah. Because I was really interested when I started the series, before I even knew it was a series, to tell the year one story. I come from comics and also from mysteries, and I kind of bring things from each of them, but I love origin stories. I love that ramp up, and you never see Marlowe's origin story or Lou Archer's origin story or, what have you. But you do see it with characters like Tess Monahan or Nick Stefanos because they're not typical detectives. They happen to have skills that in the Venn diagram overlap with a private eye. Tess is a reporter. Nick Stefanos is a curious, albeit stonery, video store employee. But, so I wanted to give Pete the tools to be a detective if he wanted to be, and then maybe set him off on that path to play with the tropes of the genre, but not necessarily be an established PI. And by the time I got to the end, I knew it was the end because we were getting to that point where he's got to hit that fork in the road. Are you going to keep risking your life and not say this is your life, or are you going to just do something else? And doing something else didn't feel realistic. It felt like he had to just embrace what he had become and really lean into it and do it well instead of just kind of fumbling his way through it. And obviously, the bigger story for him is his sobriety and his desire to overcome his demons and become a better man. But those all go hand in hand,
Now, you are a journalist as well. Is there a lot of Pete in you and Pete?
I set that first book in a newspaper setting because I found that to be fascinating, not necessarily because I was an enterprising journalist. I worked at the Miami Herald in various jobs. But at one point I was the online editor. So I was in the newsroom and really just all that meant is I was putting stories on then what the website was, which was there would be a turnover moment where all the stories would feed into the website. This is how dated it was. And obviously if there was breaking news, I could put something up. But anyway, it was a nice way to get a peek at the newsroom. And I thought it would be interesting to have Pete be a former great sports journalist who had been quote unquote reduced to just working the desk because he'd just been such a screw up, and he'd come back to Miami in the wake of his father's death, had just kind of desperately taken this job to help in the days after his father's death as his own marriage was falling apart. It just felt like a good setting in the same way that the initial idea for Secret Identity was what if I wrote a Megan Abbott style noir set in comics? And that really simplifies it all, but it's much more nuanced than that. But the idea of it's about the character, but it's also about the industry and the world. So if I give readers a world that maybe they're familiar with, but don't know intimately, that's interesting. And I love Megan's books. I think the way she does what she does, take you into different worlds like dance or cheerleading or gymnastics or science or whatever else. She does her research so well, and then you feel so immersed because you're exploring not only this character, you're exploring their world. And that to me is a layer of extra stuff that makes it more interesting. I'm not a big procedurals fan. It's not I love Harry Bosch. The Bosch books are great and a huge influence on the Pete books. But by and large, I don't gravitate towards procedurals because it just feels like this is standard day to day for them. There are some great ones like the Rebus books are fantastic. I love Ian Rankin stuff. But the books, the kind of series or PI novels for me usually tend to be like borderline amateur PIs who happen to be exploring a world or a place or an industry or a culture that I'm not familiar with or I want to know more about. And that to me, then it just feels like you're getting your dessert and your veggies too,
Well, that's what I liked about Secret Identity, because it's not set in current day. So, you're kind of free to put in whatever references you want. But also at the same time, there feels like, and I'm not a complete comics historian, but it feels like there are some deep cuts that the people that know. Oh, yeah. This is the stuff that was really, really going on during that time period. And, the names have been changed to protect the innocent.
Yeah. I mean, I hesitate to say that there's any one-for-one things. Like, one of the big things I really wanted to do, my editor, Zach Wagman at Flatiron, who was amazing, early on in the process said, you're going to have to decide between weaving the story into existing history, into a world where Superman, Batman, the X-Men all exist, or just creating your own like pastiche, kind of like Alan Moore's Thunderman story. And I didn't even consider that because I always wanted it to exist. I wanted it to be part of history. And so what that created for me was, instead of just riffing and making it all up as I went along, and then I thought it would be too distracting for people, more so than it has been with this version, to be like, oh, that's the Carmen Infantino, or that's Dick Giordano, or that's like Trina Robbins. Like, there's I still get that a lot. Like, fans are like, oh, who's this person based on? But that to me is much better than saying, oh, is this your version of like Kurt Swan?
Right.
And it was also a nice challenge to have to weave through established history. So like, there's a scene where Carmen goes into a comic convention, or a proto comic convention in New York. And it was an actual convention that happened in 1975. And I remember Sandy Jarrell, who did the beautiful interstitial comics pages, was reading the book, and he was like, I was at that show. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. He sent me the booklet. He had the booklet and he took a picture and sent it to me. And so, everything that happens that touches the real industry is based on research and fact. It just made my job harder. But I think in the end, it made for a much stronger book that, look, the proof is in the response, in that I still get emails from people every now and again that ask me like, hey, I read Secret Identity. I really liked it, but I can't find the Lynx comics anywhere. Like, do you know where I can find Lynx comics? Yeah. It's so cool because now we've actually actualized this thing into comic book history. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. That was the thing, is that it did feel so real that there were times when I was reading the book that I was like, wait a minute, is this, based on a, deep underground indie comic?
Oh, and that's great.
And I was like, no, it's not. I was like, obviously I know it's not. And then you did do that unique kind of twist to where you did turn it into the Legendary Lynx comic to bring it to life. And was that something that you had planned, or was that something that was the offshoot of people saying, hey, is this comic exist?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, I think when Sandy and I were working on the Secret Identity pages, they were mapped out as excerpts. I created them as excerpts. Like, what would be a cool moment from this issue that we could sample? But then as I was writing them, we were talking, and we were both like, this could be a whole trade. And so I think at a certain point, while Secret Identity was coming together, I knew in the back of my mind, if we found a right way to play it, that we could expand those pages into like a lost collection. And we did do that, and we had it colored or remastered, quote unquote. And then Mad Cave was very great about putting it out. And what was wonderful is they didn't break the meta part of it. It's very much tongue in cheek and very much in universe. And even J.M. DeMatteis had a great intro to the trade where he's like, oh yeah, this was a huge influence on my early work, and it influenced Craven's Last Hunt. And I know Alan Moore was influenced by it. So it's like really a beautiful, like, meta in-world thing to do. And I love stuff like that. One of the things that really spurred me to do the book years later was when I read Cavalier and Clay. I really wanted to read those escapist comics. And I know we got them late. We eventually got them. Dark Horse put them out. But I wanted them to be embedded in the novel and just kind of hop around. So it was really a blessing to be able to do that and create that world and have it exist. And then Alter Ego, which is we call it a standalone sequel. Like you can read it on its own, but obviously I would love it if you read them both. And and that picks up the modern day story, and it shows you like what Annie Bustamante, the new artist, is creating as a fan. Like she loves this character so much, she's creating this fan Lynx comic, and then that eventually becomes the new Lynx comic. And I don't want to spoil the book, but it's a big part of the story is, how does fandom exist today when all these characters are owned by mega corporations and have all these big business entanglements like movies and video games and action figures, like can you tell real stories with them? And of course you can, but the question is like, where does fandom fit into that? And it's a little bit of a darker story because the innocence of like the 70s where everyone's kind of just doing it for fun, and nobody really saw it as like a full-time career, and maybe in retrospect 20 years later they were like, oh, I maybe should have owned those characters I created for a page rate. But I think the journey is really interesting, and for me it was really cool to have that backdrop of comics.
Yeah, I enjoyed that a lot too. Now I've got Alter Ego in my stack of things to read. It's going to be
I hope you like it.
It's going to be a this year read for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple of things going back to Secret Identity. Number one, dear listener, to this, don't, as much as I like promoting audiobooks because that's how I read is when I go out and walk. Secret Identity. The biggest problem is you're missing those comic book pages. Now, they do have like a description of what's going on and it's well done, but having it in hand and being able to look at those pages in relation to the story, I think is much, much better. So get that physical copy of that if you can.
Sure, do both if you're an audio listener. I mean, Ida, the narrator, Ida Relusco, did a fantastic job of creating the sense of the comic page, which I think is really hard. And Frankie Corzo did Alter Ego, and she did a similar thing. And it's really a challenge. Like I really admire what the audiobook narrators do. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, the second thing was just kind of more praises. I live in a small town, 20,000 people, Western Kansas. And I went into the library when Secret Identity came out. And they had it as a must-read book for the month, which I was really surprised because I was like, that's typically not what you see in our library. So I was really surprised to see, up there on the little prop stand so that people could see it as they walk by and said, hey, pick up this book and read it. So,
man, I guess that's past, but next time take a picture and send it to me.
Yeah, in fact, I probably do have a picture and I'll send it to you because I was just surprised. I was like, oh, this is right here. That's, in our town that people are promoting this book. That was really good. So
that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. When you write, do you plot things out? Are you a plotter or are you a seat of the pants kind of writer?
I am a plotter, and that was a hard lesson learned during the writing of Silent City, my debut around in the 2010s when I was first crafting that book, because I thought I had just gone to BoucherCon, which, if you don't know, is like a big mystery convention that moves from location to location, but it's basically it's a fan-run convention. It's huge. I mean, not huge by like Comic-Con standards, but it's a big event. It's in a hotel usually, and you get to meet your favorite authors. But I went as a fan. And I remember listening to Michael Connelly in St. Louis, and I asked him, do you outline? And he's like, no, I just start writing and I go. And I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to try that. And so I started Silent City, and I had the idea. I knew who Pete was, and I knew what the missing person plot was going to be. But midway through the story, I was like, I have no idea what's going to happen. And I don't have like the sense of what should happen. And so I started to outline there just out of fear. And that helped me finish the book. But the lesson learned was having an outline is good, and having a map for me, it's good. Like some people can do it. Stephen King writes without an outline, but he's Stephen King, and Michael Connelly is Michael Connelly. So my advice to new writers is usually at least know the ending and at least know like the big tentpole moments. And so what I do now, my outlines have grown bigger and bigger as I go. So like in the case of Alter Ego, the outline became like a 30,000 word document. And that just eventually became the first draft. Like I was putting so much dialogue and color and texture into the outline that I sent it to a friend. I was like, do you mind reading an outline for a book? And she was like, sure. And then she got the email. And she was like, this is like a 40,000 word document. Yeah. Like you're sending me a first draft of the novel. And but I also think that it's really important to allow yourself to have the wiggle room that in case a character does something you don't expect and you want to follow them around and see what they're doing, you need to tap into that energy because that's when the book is alive. That's when the
Right.
book is doing its own thing. And there's a moment in Alter Ego, I won't spoil it for you, but there's like a big plot reveal that happens, I want to say, maybe even less than a third into the book.
Okay.
And it changes the dynamic of the entire novel, like literally changes the core characters inherently. And that was nowhere in the outline. I was just writing and writing and writing. And then I got to this point and I was like, well, what's going to happen here? And I was like, well, what if this happened? And it was fun. And that keeps me on my toes. Then you're not really like transcribing an outline. You're really in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that when you can have a character just doing their thing and they just spin off and they're just like, sorry, Alex, I'm going to go do this. I know you wanted me to do this, but here we are.
Right.
Now. So
yeah, they come to life.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I also noticed that there are a lot of comic book creators that dabble into the mystery. So there's Fabian Nicieza, who did the Suburban Dick series.
Those are fun.
In that. Those were really fun. Even though he doesn't do mystery, he did I'm trying to remember the name of it off the top of my head. But he also wrote the book Gentle Writing Advice. And, what is his name? Oh, well, Chuck Wendig. That's who it is. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Chuck. Yeah.
Chuck also does that as well. So it's interesting that so many, that's three. A sample of three is not many. But, it's interesting.
There's also like Greg Rucka, Dwayne Straczynski, Willow Wilson does novels as well as not mystery novels per se, but, she is a great novelist and a comic book writer. So, yeah, I think the overlap is there for sure.
Yeah. Is there a reason for that? Is it just because, hey, we like to write, or is it, for the genre specific aspect of it, is there something there?
In terms of novelists who write comics as well?
Yeah.
For me, it's usually, I can only, for me, it's like when I hit that moment of decision, like when I have an idea and I'm wondering, is this a novel or is this a comic? Usually it boils down to, do I want to play with others? Do I want to collaborate? Right. And do I think it works better visually in that I want the visual part to be a little more concrete and I want the reader to really see the story? Or do I think I want it to be something where I'm partnering with the reader? Like, I really see it as a creative contract. Like with a comic, I'm collaborating with the artist. I'm giving them enough to visualize my story and create a story together that they are an equal partner in. With a novel, I'm doing the same thing with the reader. It's like an imaginary contract. I'm giving you enough detail that you create this motion picture in your mind. And it's honestly a big reason why my stuff is not hyper detailed. Like I don't really get into like clothing descriptions.
Oh, sure.
Or I do some physical descriptions just to give points of reference, but I want the reader to make this up. I want them to like have enough on the plate to figure out what's going on, but not be burdened by detail. And for my rule of thumb is like, if the detail doesn't mean anything to the plot, like if Pete's shirt doesn't have any significance to the plot, or, sometimes I'll say, oh, he's wearing a Marlins cap, but that's relevant to the plot. He lives in Miami. He's a Marlins fan. But if it's not something that has any relevance, if I'm just like, oh, he wore a red polo shirt, like I'd usually cut that. And with comics, like I have the artist to bring it to life and I give those notes to the artist. And, I think I learn a lot about prose writing while writing comics and vice versa. Like I learn how to be succinct and clear with prose thanks to comics because, it's an algorithm. You have only so many word balloons you can put on a panel, so many captions, so many words in a caption, so many panels on a page. Like it feels very algebraic. And with comics, I try to make those words count because I'm coming at it from a prose perspective. Like how can I make these tiny boxes sing? So when someone reads my part, because all they're going to see are the captions and the balloons, and the art is a whole separate element. Like, what's going to make them say, "Oh, that was good"?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned, how you don't do a lot of character description stuff unless it's really, really important. That's also what I think makes Lew Archer interesting because you never really get a full description of who he is. It's just somebody you make up in your mind. And it didn't really strike me until I had recommended to a friend of mine to read the Drowning Pool. And he's like, he's hooked on it too. He's hooked on all the Lew Archer stuff as well.
You don't know what he looks like, which is fine. Like I can make somebody up.
Yeah, no, it's great. I really like that. And it's only through reading everything that you pick up little details. But even then you don't really know everything about it, and I dig that with characters. But then
it's kind of similar. Laura Lippman does it too. Like you don't really know. I mean, you kind of have an idea of what Tess Monaghan looks like, but I just cast like Maura Tierney in my head, and that worked for me. It's like, yeah. Sorry, you were saying?
No. Go ahead.
No, that's it.
I was going to say, then how does limited detail or not really trying to get a lot of descriptions in for characters, how does that then apply when you're working with something like Dick Tracy, where everybody knows Dick Tracy and all of his villains? Or maybe they don't. That may be a follow-up question here in a minute.
I mean, the thing with Dick Tracy is the challenge Michael and I had when putting this together was we want this to appeal to the hardcore Dick Tracy fans, but we are also aware that audience is finite. It's a small audience. Like the character has been around forever. The world has been, this universe has been around forever. We want this to kind of have a broader appeal. So someone who isn't necessarily a Dick Tracy diehard, but wants a cool crime comic can be brought into this with by just telling a great crime story. So first and foremost, we set out to write a great crime comic. Mm-hmm. And then in that comic, our idea was really to give this very bombastic crime newspaper strip and comic book series really ground it firmly in reality. We didn't want it to feel like, oh, Alex and Michael and Geraldo are riffing on Gould here. Like they're trying to make it look like Chester Gould. We're not.
Right.
And we're not imitating Gould. What we're doing is we're running all these cool concepts and ideas through the prism of what we want it to be, which is like a very grounded, gritty, criminal-esque comic, like something just very set in the real world. So when you have a character like Flat Top, he doesn't literally have a completely flat head. It looks kind of flat. So, we try to treat it, I guess the shorthand I would use is like, this is almost like a post-crisis reboot in that, the elements will be introduced and woven like, Batman Year One or like Man of Steel, like that kind of vibe where we're going to start introducing the toys and the elements and the villains with a little tweak and kind of make it a little more cohesive, but also with those really strong noir underpinnings.
Yeah. Yeah. I found that the first issue is I read that one. I found it very interesting because it's not like what you expect from a newspaper strip. And I think younger readers may only know Dick Tracy from the movie.
Right.
Maybe. I'm just curious because it does seem like there are so many publishing companies. Dynamite is doing it. I know Mad Cave is doing it. Jumping into that deep nostalgia, like let's bring back Flash Gordon, let's bring back Dick Tracy, let's bring back, some of these. Dick Tracy is not in public domain, but let's bring back some of these golden age characters. Is there still a big appeal for those characters?
I think so. I mean, I think the challenge and kind of the gauntlet we threw down for ourselves was like, yes, we're going to have this built-in audience, hopefully, that will come in and support it because they love this character and they are completists, but how do we appeal beyond that? Like, so that's really the hard part. Like, how do you go beyond the source material, especially if it's like in the case of like Thunderbolts or Gotcha Man, even Dick Tracy, these are properties that, I guess you could argue that the Dick Tracy movie was an awareness high point, but that was 30 odd years ago.
A while ago.
Yeah. So, it's not like it's something that just came out. So the challenge is how do we make this compelling enough that it'll appeal to people that just want good comics,
And have you figured that out? Have you tapped into that? That is there a key to success? Do you think for us is
I think. I mean, I don't know. The success will be left to the readers, but I think it's doing pretty well. I mean, I think sales wise, like the response has been really good, and critically, it's been good. But I think overall, what we've tried to do is just write a great crime story. And, we really write Dick Tracy almost like a Superman-esque character minus the powers and really like make it feel modern. I think sometimes, period pieces don't have to be completely period pieces. You know what I mean? Like we're writing it set in this time with a modern sensibility and with an eye towards realism. So, characters like Tess Trueheart, who was, isn't a super active part of the lore early on, is a key player out of the gate. And she's almost a co-star. And so is Pat Patton. So you have this like little triad of heroes that readers can follow. And they kind of cover every part of the heroic spectrum almost. And really not doing what the movie did, which I love the movie, but, we're not pouring everything into the first issue. Like you don't see all the villains in that first arc. He's got so many great rogues that, a rogues gallery comparable to the Flash or Batman or Spider-Man, just like great villains. So why like blow them all in the first arc? Look, Geraldo's a key part of that, because I think one of the biggest challenges is like, how are we visually going to show this and make it clear that while we honor what came before and what's happened, this is different. And that's really Geraldo's doing, because he visually brought this almost like a Frank Miller style to it, in terms of like blacks and color balance. And Mark Englert, the colorist, did this thing that I didn't think was possible, in that he had the kind of palette of the movie, but he toned it down. Like there's still pop, Dick Tracy's yellow pops.
Yeah, definitely.
There's different kinds of suits and colors, and you get that Art Deco-y style, but it feels a little more real, which I think is cool.
I think that was the thing that surprised me in the first issue, was just there's a little bit more blood and violence than I expected in a Dick Tracy book, and that's what I'm glad why you said that you wanted to keep it set in a specific time period and still make it modern sensibilities, because then that kind of says a lot about what's going on in the series. Was there ever a push from the King Features to, or King, is it King Features? Tribune. Tribune. Okay. Was there ever a push from them to, we've got to bring Dick Tracy to the modern day?
No, I mean, initially I had reached out to them when I was at Archie, and we got close to making it happen, and there was a mix up. And so we didn't have the license, but after I left Archie, I followed up with them, and they knew the pitch. So it wasn't like I was coming out of nowhere. The idea was always like, let's do Casino Royale for Dick Tracy. Like, let's bring it into the modern day a little bit in terms of tone and vibe, and just action and violence, and really like, and look, the Dick Tracy strips do not shy away from violence, and like they're as pulpy as they're going to get for a newspaper strip, especially the early 30s and 40s ones, but bring a little more cohesiveness to the narrative and launch this new iteration of it. So, there's no real Dick Tracy continuity in the comics. So we took the stuff that came before, like, the great Mike Allred stuff, the Avon Oming stuff. There was a really fantastic John Francis Moore, Kyle Baker story that ran right after the movie that's just beautiful to look at. And we looked at that stuff, but we didn't feel beholden to that.
Okay. And that's what, speaking of rights, you mentioned that it triggered that about a month or so ago, we had Matthew Rosenberg on the show.
Oh, yeah.
And he was talking about how he pitched the Archie Meets the Ramones to you. And you're like, yeah, sure, go out and get the rights. And he said he had to spend like a year and a half or something going down.
Yeah, it was a journey.
All the rights for everybody. And then finally he came back to you and you were like, oh, you got it. And that's how that book got made.
Yeah, I wasn't sure he could do it, because, I mean, the thing with those crossovers is that Archie, to Archie's credit, wouldn't do them without the participation of the artist. So something like Archie Meets Kiss, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley are alive, and they own and control Kiss as a brand. So they came to Archie and said, let's do it. So it's easier when that happens. And to their credit, they were not like super invasive like partners. They gave notes and that was it. But something like the Ramones, where all the key players are dead. So you're dealing with estates, you're dealing with companies that run estates. And to Matt's credit, he went and got at least enough for us to have a conversation. And that ended up making for a really fun comic that, the journey to getting there was hard. It's always hard in some way. So it wasn't like painful, but it was, it was a challenge sometimes. But he did it. And it worked out.
The whole Archie meets all of the, rock star crossovers. That was your idea, right?
Archie Kiss, Gene reached out to Archie directly, and I just kind of threw my hat in as a writer. And then when Matt got the Ramon stuff, I reached out to the people internally, and I was like, we have an opportunity to make this happen. And look, John Goldwater, the CEO at Archie, is a big music guy, so he gets it, and he's a huge Ramones person. So it was a no-brainer to do that. And then when Matt and I launched the Archie's ongoing with Joe Eisma on art, the idea, or I guess the motif, was like every issue will have a different artist. And we'd already been having discussions to kind of ramp it up. So we had like Churches, Tegan and Sarah, and then more retro acts like the Monkees and Blondie and things like that. And we even had like Speedy Ortiz in the last issue, and Josie and the Pussycats was easy because that's part of Archie, but
Right.
it was all done in partnership with these artists, which was the great part, the great
That'd
thing.
be a lot of fun doing that, though, right?
Yeah, it was cool. It was really neat. And I think the challenge with the Archies ongoing was that we needed to have a big narrative. Like, what's the idea? And the idea was like the band goes on tour, they run into some of these artists, and it was, now in retrospect, Matt and I talk about it as like it was a big story about failure, about trying to do something cool and maybe not doing as well as you thought, but then also it's all about the friends you made along the way. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really enjoyed those books a lot, especially the Ramones one was really fun.
You.
And then Blondie, and then the Monkees, because one of our co-hosts is a big Monkees fan, so it was fun to see all of those meetups as well. But as you said, dealing with the Ramones is one thing, and the Kiss was very different. But having to deal with some of these licensed properties like Archie meets Predator or Archie meets Punisher, that kind of gets into a weird territory, right? I'm not saying that you wrote those, but I'm just saying that as a writer or somebody that was working at Archie at the time, those had to be very tricky areas to work through.
I don't know. I mean, those are publishing agreements. Like Archie Punisher was way before my time. Archie Predator was during my time, and stuff like Archie Batman 66 or things like that. And that's really just like the publishers talk it out and you come up with an agreement. Usually it's like, well, who's going to publish it? Like who's going to pay for the printing and the creative and the distribution? And then, what are the percentages after you have the initial, like, is this a good idea? Like, do we want to do this?
Well, but I mean, like the Archie versus Predator was very different. I mean, that's a very different book than what people might expect when you're looking at Dan Parent art and then seeing everything that's happening.
But I think that also,
it's like there are lines we can't cross.
Yeah, and I think there's also, but I think it also tapped into like what the era was, which was to show the flexibility of the characters, that you could do like an Afterlife with Archie story where Archie has to kill his dog or his dad, or has to like like there's a zombie invasion in Riverdale, but it's still Archie. It's just a different kind of Archie, and you can still have the classic funny sitcom all ages Archie in the same way that you can have a Lego Batman movie and then do something like The Batman as a major motion picture. So I think it's really just a testament to the IP, not to get all corporate about it, but it's a testament to how flexible those characters are, which is good.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, huge fan of Francesco Francavilla. And when I saw his art in Afterlife with Archie, I was like, oh, this is going to be a great series. And of course, Roberto had a great story in there as well. And I do like the fact, and this is something that maybe is a quiet testament to Archie, is that Archie's super progressive and doesn't seem to be afraid to go in a different direction if they think it can make a good story. For example, introducing LGBTQAI characters into the series. I thought that was very cool. Archie has always been very cool about, hey, we're going to add this person of color, or this person from another country or different cultures, and introduce those into the books as well. And it seems like, yes, you do have the Million Moms, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of pushback when Archie does it, as opposed to when DC or Marvel might do it. Yeah,
I think I can only speak to my time there, but I think the idea was always Riverdale was a reflection of the world, of the world today. And I think that is a very simple way of saying we're just reflecting the world to you. We're showing you that in Riverdale, everyone is welcome. Everything is good. Kindness matters. Everyone is good to each other. There's, always problems and humor and things happen, but it's a welcoming, safe place. And I think that's very relatable and people want that.
How then is that different when you're doing Star Wars? Because again, I think Star Wars would have a lot more control over what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do.
I think, in my experience with Star Wars is that they're very open to new ideas and new voices. And obviously, I think my experience with Lucasfilm and Marvel and Star Wars has been highly positive in that they're open to ideas, they're open to suggestions, open to new characters. And I think a big part of it is obviously there's an established canon, like there's no real IP that I can think of that has as much established canonical lore, and I guess maybe Marvel Comics per se or DC Comics. There's a lot of places with lore, but it's canonical. Like the movies and the books and the comics are all woven together. So like, in the MCU, there's the movies, but that continuity doesn't affect the publishing. Whereas with Lucasfilm, it's all one story. So you have to go in being mindful of that. And I think, if you go in like a wrecking ball and say, well, I want to do this, and this is a story I want to tell, even though it contradicts what came before, you might not have the success you envisioned.
Yeah,
but
I guess that's the angle that I was looking at, was that because of the continuity, you have to be, you're much more limited to what you can do with characters or storylines or something like that, because you did the Poe Dameron arc, and you also did the most recent Battle of Jakku storyline. And it's like Battle of Jakku has to end in a certain way, because that's the only way that you can get the return of the, not the Return of the Jedi, but you get the third series of Star Wars movies.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could either look at that as a limitation, which it isn't really a limitation, it's just what came before. Or you can look at it as a challenge, which is how I looked at it. Like, how do I see all this stuff that's canonical and established and meaningful? How do I add a different perspective to what fans feel like they've read or seen already? And then also, how do I layer in a new story, which is, how do you make Adelhard a meaningful villain for this Jakku arc? And how do you, like, what were the key players doing during the Jakku stuff, the lead into the Battle of Jakku? And we know they weren't on the ground fighting on Jakku, but we do know that they can still be having meaningful roles. And so that was a challenge. And like, I wanted it to feel important and epic, and Marvel Editorial was super supportive of that, and as was Lucasfilm. And they were very open to the idea of creating new characters and really elevating this fairly obscure villain from a video game. I was pretty proud of that deep cut. And so, and elevating him to be a meaningful villain and a meaningful threat to the New Republic that's still like wobbly and barely on its feet. Like, the war's not even over yet. And really, I found it fascinating to show the Empire in collapse, like in disrepair. And to really take threads at, guys like Chuck Wendig and a lot of the authors that were in the novel space were planting, Charles, Alexander Freed, Alex Freed, and all these great talents, and weaving it all together as best I could. It's never going to be perfect. There's just so much that happened, and that's in the canon, but you try your best. And I think we ended up creating some fun new characters, like Rin Zanat is really fun. I got to play with Ziva Bliss, who I introduced in the Poe Dameron book. And really, there's some echoes to the Poe Dameron book. So I don't know, somehow this era has become my spot, which is good.
That's great, because again, whenever the series was first announced, I was like, is this going to be based on the video game? And I think you tied it all together very well.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
And again, I don't know how many people played Star Wars Battlefront, Battle of Jakku when it came out, but I know I enjoyed the heck out of playing it. So returning to that era is always kind of nice to see those kinds of stories. And as I said to some other writers and creators, I'm not a huge fan of the 0.5. Hey, let's tell the story in between the story. Just for, money-making purposes. Sometimes it works really, really well, like with what was going on with Battle of Jakku or with other comics. I think that works out nicely, but I think it has to be planned a little bit more.
It's all about the stakes, even if you're doing a prequel, or if you're doing something that weaves through established canon, you have to create stakes so people feel like the characters are at risk. Like, look, if you're a smart reader, there's just no way Luke's not gonna die.
Yeah, he's not gonna die.
But you can create stakes to make the reader care about the other characters and care about what Luke's journey is in this story, and that's on us as the creatives to make happen.
Yeah, very good. Real quick, Mysterious Microface. I was listening to Planet Money when they first brought it up. And I was just like, well, this is interesting. And they're like, we're going to create a comic book. We went to talk to Alex. And I was like, what? I know this guy. How did that come around? Was this just by chance? They were, trying to call and figure out places to get the property launched, or how did that? It was one
of those like small world moments. I've known Kenny Malone, one of the co-hosts, for a long time. And he worked at the Miami Herald when I was living in Miami. And so we had that connection, and he called me to kind of just pick my brain. Knowing that I worked in comics, and because they were doing this series. And then we went back and forth long enough that he was like, well, can I just interview you? Because I'm basically doing that, and you would be a good source. At the time, I was president at Archie or co-president at Archie, and so
Yeah.
I think at one point they're like, "Would you sell us a character?" And I said, "No, no one's going to sell you a character." You're like, I think I said you're one good story away from like $1 billion franchise, so no one's going to sell you. Even Marvel is not going to sell you like one of the Great Lakes Avengers or one of their like D level characters because you never know. And then he was like, "Well, what would we do? Well, what can we do?" I said, "You can always like pull someone out of the public domain and just make your own version." And then that conversation, part of which was caught on air or was recorded as part of the podcast, became, "Well, can you do it? Can you write it?" And I said, yeah, it was such a unique assignment. And getting the chance to work with Jamal Igle, who's one of my oldest friends in comics and so talented, did a lot of covers for me when I was at Archie. And it's just a great pro. And then having Jerry Ordway, like one of my favorite all-time comic book artists, to design the Microface costume was just a thrill. And so it was like a very similar to the Battle of Jakku in terms of like the puzzle box aspect. Like we had to write a comic that had to thread a lot of needles. And one of them was like tell a fun superhero comic that was also like a business comic that teaches you about business. And so there's a villain called the Corporate Raider and stuff like that. It's fun, hopefully in the vein of the show.
Yeah, no, I really, I can't remember if that was listed as a regular comic or if that went on Kickstarter or what, but I know that I've got my copy bagged and boarded somewhere from a couple of years ago because it's just so unique to see how they did that whole process and walk the listener through, which I think gave people a little bit broader understanding of both public domain, comic book creation, and a lot more.
Yeah, it's they only sold it through the NPR website, so if you have one of the copies, that's really the only way you could have gotten it until someone picks it up.
Yeah. What are some of what are other projects that you're working on now that you can talk about?
I am finishing up the question All Along the Watchtower for DC with Key and Tormey. Thank you. Yeah, that's been a real blast. Like literally getting to write all my favorite DC heroes in one book, particularly Renee Montoya has been, a career defining moment. I'm also co-writing Green Hornet Miss Fury with Henry Barajas at Dynamite with art by newcomer Federico Ceresa, who is great. Like he's just got this very detailed, almost Greg Smallwood type vibe that I love. And I think I want to say the third issue just hit yesterday. So we've got 2 more to go with that. And the new Star Wars ongoing set in the post Return of the Jedi world launches in May with Phil Noto on art, which is kind of a insane sentence that I get to say out loud. And this September, Daredevil Enemy of My Enemy comes out. It's a novel, Marvel crime novel that cool. Hyperion's putting it out, and it's exactly what that is, a Daredevil crime novel. No pictures.
I'm going to dig into that because for whatever reason, I also enjoy reading the Marvel prose stuff. I think they do a pretty good job. And the Daredevil one, I forget who did the Daredevil one that I read not too long ago.
Was it Chris Golden?
It may have been. It was just so well done. And the production quality that they put into it is very good as well. Do you like playing with other people's IPs? I mean, you mentioned Green Hornet. We've got Star Wars. We got Dick Tracy. We've got the Ramones. We've got all of these. Do you like playing with in those sandboxes?
I do. I mean, I love creating my own properties, and I will always do that because it's a way. There's that saying, "Scratch the serial numbers off," but there's always you sometimes want to tell a story that is just not going to exist in the buckets that are out there. So you have to create your own bucket, and you can take your inspirations and put them together and come up with something new. But we all come into this industry because we're fans. And I came into this industry because I love a lot of the characters. That said, sometimes people will ask me, "Hey, do you want to write a story in this world or like with this character?" And I'll be honest, if I have no like connection to the character, I'm just not going to do as good a job as someone that has the passion for it. So I'd rather, all these, the work for hire stuff I do because I love it and I love those characters.
Yeah. And I wonder too, do you ever worry about getting boxed in as he's the mystery writer? He's done Green Hornet and Dick Tracy and The Question. Do you ever worry about getting locked into that type of a story assignment?
I worry about it in terms of, like people just assuming this is what he does. So that's why I do my best to stay nimble. Like I'll write a sci-fi novel, I'll write a YA novel, I'll write, different kinds of creator-owned stuff just so that you have that versatility or that proof of concept. And, people could say, oh, he writes mysteries. And I do write mysteries, but I also write a lot of other stuff. So, and I think that's really just a testament on publishing today, that you have to really be versatile and nimble. I mean, not to the point where you're doing stuff you don't like to do, but you should keep your options open, because you never know what's going to become your new thing.
Mm-hmm. What is going on with the industry right now? Certainly, do you have any thoughts on what's going on with Diamond?
I'm bummed out that it's gotten to this point. It's not a good situation when one of the top distributors is potentially not going to be doing it for much longer. So I'm curious to see how it all plays out. I really hope that at the end of the day, there's a way to get books to retailers in a quick way and they feel comfortable with whatever the end result is. But, it's a lot of uncertainty, and you're seeing a lot of movement and a lot of changes. And I really hope that the publishers that existed before continue to exist, because it's not a given that they can just pivot to somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so we've seen, just on the website, we get the press releases saying, hey, we're moving over to Lunar, or we're moving over to Random House or whoever else. And it seems like many of the bigger publishers have had no problem making that pivot. But I have heard things from smaller indie publishers that are like, we can't even get a phone call returned to us, and we don't know what's going to happen. And because of that uncertainty, unfortunately, and also these on again, off again tariffs, that's also impacted the comic book retailer. We just had somebody comment a couple of weeks ago on our website saying, hey, my local comic shop is closing because of these two things, the supposed tariffs, and because of the distribution, that they don't know who to contact anymore. And so it seems kind of dire, but at the same time, it also feels like the comic book industry is not in dire straits.
I mean, the comics are dying. Plot point has been dangling over the industry since the beginning of time. 1938. So, which is not meant to minimize what people are struggling with. I would say support your indie bookstores, support your comic shops, go and buy stuff more than you would otherwise. That's what's going to keep this industry going, and what's going to keep comics flowing the way they're flowing. I think it's a challenging time. I think in terms of awareness, comic book awareness has not been greater, just because of movies and TV shows. But I think the connective tissue of people being aware, oh, this show I'm watching is a comic book. Now let me go buy the comic book. That's always the challenge, That's the marketing challenge.
Do you think the cartoon shows do a better job of that than the movies and regular TV shows, as far as?
I don't know. I wouldn't want to generalize. I think it's much easier for a kid to watch Batman Brave and the Bold and then pick up a comic that is drawn in the exact same style. So I guess in terms of appealing to younger readers, maybe, but I don't have any data to support that, yay or nay.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. It's just this time period, we get a lot of people, screaming that the sky is falling. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, maybe it is, but also maybe it isn't. So you having a better inside look probably could have weighed in on that a little bit. Yeah. Alex, I've occupied so much of your time. I want to thank you for that. But do you have any words of advice for people who are wanting to be a prose writer or a comic book writer?
Yes, my biggest advice to anyone is to finish something that is your own. I know, I fell into the same trap where I was like, I have this idea for this 12-book sci-fi series, and I'm going to start it now as an inexperienced writer. I would just suggest finish a short story, or find a friend to collaborate with on a short comic book that is yours, that you can create and type the end, and then you have a thing, and then you do another thing, and just really keep creating the work, because once that's when the work for hire stuff happens, when people recognize your work. It's very rare to just go directly into comics unless you're a screenwriter or an established novelist or an established person, which kind of answers the question in itself. Establish yourself telling the stories you want to tell, do it for fun, do it for the passion, and then go from there.
All right, great. Alex, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Now, dear reader, this is usually the point where I say, hey, there's more stuff over on our Patreon page, but I'm not going to do that this week. There is bonus content, though. At one point in the conversation, Alex and I veered off and started talking about Legion of Superheroes. And since we have a Legion of Superheroes podcast, you may have listened to it. Matthew and I do this every 2 weeks, bi-monthly or bi-weekly, depending on how you define those terms. And so I've taken that little bit where we're talking about the Legion of Superheroes, and I've put it into this week's show, episode 184. And you can find it on majorspoilers.com. You can find Legion Clubhouse in all the places where all of the greatest podcasts are served. My preference is Apple Podcasts, but you may be a Spotify fan. Go listen to it. It's just a real quick five-minute conversation. But we might have Alex back on the show more and in the near future. Go check it out. And speaking of Patreon, if you would like to ensure that we can do more interviews like the one I just did with Alex or the one last week with Matt Brawley, now is the time. Now is the best time for you to become a patron at patreon.com/majorspoilers. Not only does your contribution allow us to keep this show going, pay for our server costs, pay for our distribution fees, all of that stuff, but it gives you more bonus content. Listen, when you sign up at the $5 level, $5 a month, you get instant access to hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours of content, bonus content that you can't find anywhere else. The Major Spoilers Podcast pre-show is something that you will find. You can get access to the VIP chats. You get access to Book Club, which is free, by the way. You don't even have to be a paid member to get access to the Major Spoilers Book Club show. Get that over there at patreon.com/majorspoilers. You get access to Movie Club, where we provide commentary for some of your favorite movies. Yeah, you get instant access to all of that and more when you sign up for as little as $5 a month. Find out more at patreon.com/majorspoilers. Well, I kind of lied to you at the beginning, ladies and gentlemen. I said Rodrigo was going to be a part of this show, but he's not. He's out sick this week. Sorry. But we are going to still talk about the Great British Bump Off. And if you listen to the Major Spoilers Podcast pre-show, I've given you a hint of the things we're going to talk about. What I'm calling 10 things you didn't know about the Great British Bump Off. I'm not going to do that to you, ladies and gentlemen. But if you're wanting to know what I'm talking about, please go listen to the pre-show this week. The title of the episode is Stephen Gets Angry, ... again.
You know, you don't have to say the ...
Yeah, you do. Because that's that pause, right? That comic books have used so effectively in sarcasm. I don't know how you write sarcasm when you're saying effectively. But
I use sarcasm tags. So
no, but but see, that's the thing. The sarcasm tag is only a thing that came about after people understood what HTML is. So the earliest that you could have a sarcasm tag would be after 1995, at the earliest. So if you're Ernest Hemingway, I guess you just say, he said sarcastically. I don't know how we got onto this, but we're supposed to be talking about the Great British Bump Off from John Allison and Max Sarin, published by Dark Horse Comics, and a listener recommendation. As a reminder, most of the trades that we are reading this year, Matthew, are listener recommendations. This one, who is this one? Who is the person that recommended this? This is Megatron Stew, because Megatron Stew demanded it. Listen, it is Kismet, Karma. It is the Great Conjunction. It is the pre-programmed nature of the universe that put the Alex Segura interview right here in this place and time, because we talked with Alex about mysteries, and the Great British Bump Off is also a mystery. It's almost like this whole show is a mystery. It's almost like my whole life is a mystery, Matthew. How did I get here? This is not my beautiful wife.
This is not my beautiful stapler. What is the cat navy? I don't understand.
Have you ever watched the Great British Bake Off?
I mean, I don't think I've ever watched it necessarily, but I'm absolutely familiar with it. I've probably seen clips from it a million times.
Yeah, I have never watched the Great British Bake Off, but my understanding is it is actually a kind reality TV show. I stopped watching reality TV back in 2005 or 6 because of how hate-filled and spiteful, and how it brought out the worst in people on these shows. Doesn't matter if it was a cooking show on the Learning Channel back when it was actually good programming before, Aliens. It may have been stuff. Well, it's the same way with The Amazing Race. These shows I would have considered fascinating back in the day, but then when you see how much evil it brings out in people, the whole concept of reality television just turns my stomach. But from my colleagues who have watched The Great British Bake Off, they said, no, this is a show where people are actually good and kind and helpful. And it is the anti-reality competition show. And so maybe I'll give it a chance at some point. Are you a fan of the cozy mystery, Matthew? Are you the fan of the whodunits?
I am a huge fan of the Benoit Blanc movies. Is that a cozy mystery?
In a
I think
sense,
the first one
yes.
definitely is.
No, they both are, because if you think about the tropes of a cozy mystery, it is usually a limited number of characters, usually in a single location. So in the Glass Onion, they're all on the island. No, it's true. They're all on the island together.
No, I'm not saying they're not.
You've got people that are an amateur sleuth. Now, that might be the break point, because Benoit Blanc is definitely not an amateur sleuth.
I feel like he is. I keep coming back to the amateur,
but he's not, because
so
it's the amateur part.
He's paid, but he's not a detective. He doesn't have any jurisdiction.
No, he doesn't. No, he would be a private consultant or private detective. That's not an amateur sleuth. What we see in the Great British Bump Off is we do see Shauna, who is an amateur, who has a love for mysteries, but she is definitely not a detective like a Benoit Blanc. Does this take place in a charming setting? Yes, it does. It takes place inside the tent of a baking contest, where Neil
bakery tent.
Yeah, where Neil the meteorologist has been murdered, or he hasn't been murdered, but he has been sabotaged. He's been poisoned by the deadly nightshade for this competition, because it was expected that he was going to win. And so Shauna takes it upon herself over the course of 4 issues. So this is a very short read, to go through the clues with you, the reader, to figure out the puzzle. And that's the other thing. Puzzle solving is part of the cozy mystery. To figure out ultimately who done it, in a very suspenseful turn that no one saw coming. Or, unless you followed the clues, you knew exactly what was going on. So,
and that's the thing. It's not an Ellery Queen. It's not like, this is going to be hard to piece together.
So, dear listeners, if you aren't aware, we do the Major Spoilers Book Club over on the Major Spoilers Patreon page. It's absolutely free. This month, we're doing The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But the thing that launched the book club was when Brad and I were doing these Monday Mystery Matinee episodes. And we were talking about mysteries, and I don't like Ellery Queen. I don't like those mysteries. I can deal with a Miss Marple, but Ellery Queen and kind of like Sherlock Holmes are both kind of fall into the category of, you're too smart for everyone else, and I don't care for it.
Ellery Queen is like the mystery equivalent of the super, super hard science fiction of the late 50s.
Yeah.
Where you have to know all of these crazy things.
Yeah. Well, of course, Ellery Queen much, much earlier than that too. But, so, you take the Great British Bake Off, you take it with your cozy mystery, you slam them together, and you get the Great British Bump Off. And for the most part, I think connecting all the dots is pretty clear here. Although I would say that, like a Glass Onion or like a Knives Out, that the thing that makes this story the most interesting are the characters, not the mystery,
personalities,
but all the characters.
I definitely agree. And I think that for me, that, is kind of the difference between just a mystery and something that really sings to me. Like, Glass Onion is fun because it's not just big over the top characters. It's big over the top characters played by actors who are clearly having fun and throwing themselves into it. And if you think about this, of these characters as actors, now I know, for instance, that our main character actually predates this book. I think Shauna had appeared in other stuff by this creator before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was web comics or if it was something that was like a comic book that was collected, but the big point at the beginning where we're having the massive confrontation, put that finger away, Trevor.
Yeah.
That whole point is so good because you get a feel for who everybody is at that point in moment. You see, oh, how dare you egg me? You have the character who's angry and the character who is constantly the victim, and then you have the big bully guy. And it really does show us a lot of information throughout the course of maybe 4 pages, but it gives us a lot of things that we need to know about the characters in that, the show don't tell style. We see them clashing. We see them in action. If you know the reality TV archetypes, you can kind of see who is this, who is that. And then you have Shauna, who's the quirky weirdo trying to do her best, but also being pretty much out of her depth as a detective and as a baker.
As a cook, yes.
Yeah.
Because I don't think she scores above third to last in any of the cooking competitions that she does. And so
intentional charring. It's intentional charring.
Considering that maybe she knows she's not a good cook. Now, I'm not saying she had anything to do with the poisoning or the attempted murders in this piece, but I find it funny that she sees an opportunity to stay in the game by declaring that she will solve the mystery. And so because of that, the producers are kind of inclined to maybe keep her around a little bit, if that makes sense. It's really weird to think of it that way, but there's a part of me that is like, Shauna may not realize it, or maybe she does, and it is not conveyed on the page, but it almost seems like an evil scheme to, like, if I say I can solve this mystery, they're going to keep me around and not kick me off the show so that I can continue to be on the show. It's kind of ingenious, but I do like the characters. Have you ever seen the movie The Last of Sheila?
I don't think I have.
Okay, it's another cozy mystery. I would call it a cozy mystery only because you've got a cast of characters that are, again, very much archetypes of different groups of people. And somebody has died, and they're all being kind of slowly exposed, kind of almost like a reverse Columbo, where everybody's kind of being tormented a little bit on these things that led to the death of Sheila, and trying to figure out who was the person that actually killed Sheila. It's very well done. And for people that have seen the movie, the twist. They don't do that here in this book, but I was thinking that this book reminded me a lot of The Last of Sheila, in that you've got these colorful characters and you're narrowing it down little by little. And it's clear that there are some people that didn't do it, but then there are a group of people that you're like, one of these 3 people probably did it.
Almost certainly they did.
Yeah.
But who? Yeah. And one of my favorite parts of just the whole thing are just the moments that stick out as this is something that you might see on a reality TV show that work as almost a television moment, but are clearly in the comic book beat, where she's like, my flavors are lychee and beetroot. Flavors that belong side by side in an unmarked grave. I can see that right before you go to break.
Yes, chef. Yeah.
Yes, chef. Exactly. Or Alex is about to, vote you off of, you've been chopped.
Yeah, I've never seen that show, so I wouldn't even know that reference.
Alex is cute. Alex is very cute.
All right.
You'd like her.
I think the other thing that really, and I don't think we're going to spoil the who actually did it portion of this, because I think that this is a fun read if you are someone who likes mysteries.
It was one of the people in the tent.
Yes, we will say that. But I will also say that I really like the art in this, in that it's very cartoony. So don't go into this thinking that you're going to get some reflection of reality in how the characters are drawn. Everyone has an exaggeration of some point. The old lady judge is literally a skeleton with a wig and a dress on.
The crazy hippie dude literally looks like a crazy hippie dude with long nose and glasses, and looks like he just suddenly dropped in from an acid trip from 1962. There's just the art and the character and design, I think, is super well done, because too often we see in traditional superhero comic books that you've got a design. We've talked about this before with Legion of Superheroes back in the early 70s and even in the 50s, where basically they're all the same character with just a different costume, and that's how you can tell them apart. And they don't really, and really good character design is their profile or their shadow should tell you who that character is just at a glance. And here, the artist Max Sarin has done a wonderful job of just creating these characters that if you only saw their silhouette, you would know exactly who that is.
And it's neat too, because our main character has that specific silhouette, and she actually befriends, and I can't remember the old lady's name, but she befriends the old lady, and they are very similar looking characters. So when you see them in profile or you see them together, there's that similarity of design, intentionally so, to where you look at it and you go, oh, right, these are characters who are meant to be kind of literally drawn together. And that's really neat to me. Also, there's one girl who literally looks like Luisa from Encanto in here.
Encanto,
yeah. She's wonderful.
Brandy?
I love her.
Brandy, I think is her name. Yeah, she's one of the suspects because she is a drug person.
She's a pharmacist.
Yeah, pharmacist. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for.
She's a drug person.
She's a drug pusher. She pushes drugs on people.
Go for the Latin. Farm meaning drug.
Yeah,
and,
I had to go
cyst
for
meaning
boil on your ass. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I found this book really, really charming. I do. So here's my biggest complaint, and it's more of a complaint from me because I read this all in one sitting, and maybe this would work better as take a break as you go through here. I know that this is supposed to be poking fun at these two genres, right? Of both the reality TV and the cozy mystery. And so when you're doing parody, and I wouldn't say that this is a straight up parody, although parody plays a large part in what makes this story work, because you have to understand the workings of both of those areas to understand, to really get the jokes. But some of these characters, well, in fact, all of these characters are big face actors. And what do I mean by a big face actor? So a big face actor, typically I say as a stage actor is a big face actor. Because if you're a stage actor and you're not mic'd up, you have to make sure that your body is positioned towards the audience a little bit more. You have to frame yourself. You have to speak louder so that the people in the back can hear you. And because people are so far away and you don't have the advantage of using a close-up, all of your actions have to tend to be over-the-top actions, just big actions.
Right.
So you have what I call big face acting. And I think in this book, there's a lot of big face acting. And it's done part of the parody. But after a bit, it really gets tiring for me. It started to become a drain that I can only take so much of Sakura and Susie or whatever the heck the pink girl's name is. And I can only take so much of Brandy or so much of the guy with the crazy hairdo just because of how leaning into all of the tropes and the parody of the characters that they're supposed to be, that it became a little bit grinding. Now, not enough to where I would say, ugh, this book is trash, but that's kind of the vibe that I got after a while. I don't know if you felt the same way or not.
I can definitely see it. People in the 90s would have called it the Kramer problem, but I'm old, so I would call it the Dr. Smith problem. Where you have that character, the pain. You have these characters who are so fun and so broad, but then when they become too prevalent, if they're too much, and to use a baking metaphor, if you have a little too much of that ingredient, it can really overbalance it. Now, I didn't feel that because I feel like Yeah, I've been trying to really tighten up my language a little bit, and I've been looking into like the difference between something being a parody and something being like a pastiche. Like Big Bang Comics is a pastiche, and I feel like this is like meant to pastiche those mysteries. It's like we're gonna pay homage to it. We're gonna take all the bits and pieces that we love. We're really gonna call it out and say, hey, here's things that we really love about this kind of story with our little twist on it. So it's not like, to me, a parody, it would be you're almost making fun of it. You're using
But I think that's
a mockery.
I don't know if I would say so. Like Blazing Saddles, I guess you would say is kind of making the end of any genre is always parody. Whether that is a scary movie, whether that is Blazing Saddles, whether that is a Young Frankenstein, the end of any genre is always parody. And I think that in this case, with what the creators are doing in kind of making fun of the Glass Onions or the Knives Out or the cooking shows and the Great British Bake Off shows, I think they are kind of poking fun at how over the top all of this is while still telling a compelling story, because that is something you can still do inside of that while you're making these characters like Clue, where everyone is really over the top. Yeah, this might be a pastiche, but I don't think that there is ill intent in making fun.
Right.
But there is definitely hey, we're going to poke this and show you, if you're a fan of this, take a silly adventure with us.
I can see that. And I feel like, yeah, I'm still kind of thinking about your question of, did it ever get so broad that it threw me? And there were a couple of times where, I keep thinking about the scene where she's trying to figure out what's going on. She's arguing with I think it's the producer guy, the guy with the big hair who looks like Mickey Dolenz.
Yeah.
And he's, she's fired, and he's just all over the place. Like, he's like Bugs Bunny in some ways. And I definitely look at that and go, this is way over the top. This is almost melodrama, but I'm also kind of the guy who loves that too. So
no, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it. I said at the end, I don't know if I could do 6 issues of this. If this were a web comic, I would be like, I'm going to take a couple of month break and then I'll come back and catch up. Not because I dislike it, but because I need a break from these characters.
Right. And this, this particular plot, I don't think would have had more issues in it either. I feel like this is the perfect length of space to do what we need to do here. And there's a certain point where it's almost too much, and then it's not, and it's fine. And then the old lady chases her out into the woods, and we find out what the cat navy is all about. But,
since this show is major spoilers, and Matt Bray
don't do it.
Called us out last week about, hey, this show is major spoilers, so spoil some things. I mentioned Sheila, the movie. Again, not wanting to spoil that movie, but the character who you think is possibly the whodunit person, Maisie is her name. When you figure out who the actual culprit is, and when you pay attention to the art very carefully, you will see a connection there in a way that is kind of telling you way ahead of time. Let's just say everybody has a unique apron for a reason. And that's as far as I'm going to do to get to spoiling this. At the end of the day, I enjoyed this. I would read, and I do believe there is a sequel or something, another story that involves these two creators. I would read stuff from these creators again. I have no problem. If you said, hey, John Allison and Max Sarin have created a new adventure, whether it's stars Shauna or not, I would read it. I would say, okay, this is something that I'm going to put on my to read pile. This is not something that I would put on my skip pile. I am a fan of mysteries. I just spent an hour talking with Alex Segura about how much I love mysteries. And I would read more of this stuff. I don't find it
offensive. I don't find it distasteful. I don't find it easily predictable. And so I really enjoy it. So even though I may have some harsh things to say, there's nothing really wrong with this comic.
Suno, Jill, and Shauna went on holiday together at the end.
Yeah. So maybe
nice,
maybe they all went and did a follow-up adventure.
I feel like the real bump off was the friends we made along the way. No?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
Good.
Oh yeah, there is no. Is this when is this one released? Oh no, there is a sequel to this. It's called
good.
The Great British Bump Off, Killer Bee Quilt. Killer Bee Quilt.
Okay,
now, the thing is, it looks like the first issue will arrive in April, with issue number 2, the one that I'm looking at the solicitation for, arrives May 21st. So I would say, if we go by the monthly release of comics, The Great British Bump Off, Killer Bee Quilt, number 1 will probably arrive April 21st.
Okay.
So you got your final order cutoff is probably already passed, but let your comic book store know. Yep. I'm going to read this. I'm going to read. I said I would read it. I'm going to read this.
And these characters apparently come out of a webcomic called Bobbins, which has had several spin-offs, including one that I have heard of called Giant Days. And I didn't realize.
We've read Giant Days here on the show.
Yeah, it's apparently that same universe.
Yeah, this is the one. Remember where the girl, that's not Giant Days. I'm thinking of something else.
I think you're thinking of the one with the what do you call it? The thing in the face.
Not Scary Go Round, but that's the one. The art looks very much like that. But yeah, whatever.
That's the same creators.
Yeah. I read Scary Go Round back in the day. Yeah, so apparently it's these guys, and I like their work. So there you go.
There you
go. What did you dislike, Matthew?
I feel like when you offer me something called the Great British Bump Off, but nobody actually dies, I feel like I wanted to see more people die. And that may just be that it may be that I'm a terrible person, because my daughter and I watched a couple of movies called Escape Room, and then the sequel, Escape Room: Tournament of Champions, where the main character shows up at the beginning and she has a group of like 6 friends, and then they slowly die off. And at the end, you have 1 or 2 survivors. That to me would make for an interesting series. Now, I understand that's not what they're doing here. I feel like, yes, a series of murders probably would have broken the premise, because if someone actually died, they would have to stop the show.
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing. They would have to stop the show.
Would they? Let's pause for a moment and think about the current world in which we live in and the reality situation in which we live in.
Yeah.
If Neil had actually been murdered, in this show, I think the producers would have said Neil was murdered, and they would use that to up their ratings.
There's a movie that I've seen recently, directed by Giancarlo Esposito, and he's one of the characters in the film. It's called The Show, and it was going to be called This Is Your Death, but they thought that was a little too dark. And literally, it starts with a reality TV show where someone loses and then pulls out their gun, and then it turns into a reality TV show about death. And the guy who starts this is like, he's like, oh, I'm gonna make this about the human condition and elevating all of our lives by seeing that we all have something to lose. And it just turns into standard schlock, but it is fun to go through and see that, but also very dark. It is not like, hey, kids can watch this and have fun. There's a scene where a guy's like, I've decided I'm going to wrap myself in primer cord, and then I'm going to set it off. And I'm like, no,
that sounds like gore porn. I'm not into that stuff.
It's not that bad, but it's definitely, I think it's tragedy porn, because everybody on the show has, a horrible backstory and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So are you going to recommend this or not recommend this?
I would recommend it with a caveat. I think this is definitely a borrow for me.
Oh, okay.
And I think that that borrow is going to come down to when you really get in and you start getting into this. If, as you came and bumped into, if it's too broad for you, then that's, maybe a back down. And if, like me, you maybe think, well, more people should have died, let's do a whole Final Destination in here. You might also have that. But I feel like this kind of hits a sweet spot in between, where if you really do appreciate those kind of what you call the cozy mysteries.
Yeah, no, that's what they're called, cozy mysteries.
Yeah, I'm aware. That's why I said you call them that.
I love
you
them.
call them that.
I love
you receive it.
I like Miss Marple. I love Perot.
Miss Marvel? I love Miss Marvel.
I love Southern
Perot?
Fried. I love Southern Fried Detectives.
Can I finish? Can I finish?
I love
Can
Pete
I finish?
Fernandez.
Can I finish? Can I finish? You love Keith Hernandez? Didn't he play for
Pete Hernandez? Pete Fernandez.
I think he played for
that's Alex
New York
Segura's.
Yankees.
That's Alex Segura's book series. You guys really ought to go check those out. Same way with Alter Ego and Secret Identity. You guys really need to go check out. I think Matthew. I don't know if you are a book reader, but I think you would probably really get a kick out of Secret Identity because it is set in the 1970s comic book industry. And there is a murder, and there is a question on who is the creator of this comic book character that suddenly becomes super popular, and the cover-up to keep the character or the creator under wraps is very good. Is very, very good. And then the sequel to that is Alter Ego, which I haven't read yet, but it came out late last year. So I think you'd dig both of those.
Cool. I'll look out for Alter Ego.
Yeah, well, Secret Identity is where I would start first because Alter Ego is literally the sequel to it. So you kind of have to know what happened. So Secret Identity first, Alter Ego second. And it's a good time. It's a good time. And I really thank Alex for stopping by on the show to talk with us this week. And that made for more great listening, hopefully / entertainment for you, dear listener. Hopefully you got a kick out of this. And if you want even more discussions, go check out Stephen is angry ... again over on the Major Spoilers Patreon page, patreon.com/major spoilers, and kick in a couple of bucks a month so we can bring more. We can take the time, because that is the biggest problem, is finding the time to interview great and wonderful people like Alex, Matt Brawley, not Matt Brawley. Matt Brawley, the other Matt that we had on not too long ago, and all of the rest. Takes time and money to do.
Our hero. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So if you find it in your heart to give right now, that'd be great. $5 a month would be the great sweet spot for you to start. If you're already at the $5 level and you've been enjoying what we do, maybe think about kicking it up to the $10 level and get access to some extra stuff over there at patreon.com/major spoilers, which also seems to be, the clock on the wall says is getting close to Stephen's bedtime, which means it's time to say so long, farewell, and next time on the show, we will be talking about Once Upon a Time Lord, because we haven't reviewed enough Doctor Who on this show, and because we know that you love the BBC, and we do too. We'll talk with you soon.
Fat Dick's Ray vision of a Superman. I could save a few bucks and stand around and read through the covers of the comics on the stand. But although every other page would be backwards, I suppose I could still read the evens and the odds. Well, I don't know. Guess I haven't thought this all the way through. Plus, as soon as the comic book store guy knew, they kicked my butt out on the corner. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Think about a better way. If I was hulking green or gray, I could just bust through that brick wall, take their comic books away. But then the little meat would deal with all the tanks and bombs and guns. Have you ever tried to read a series with all that going on? Guess I need to rethink this plan. How would I back and board my comics with such huge hands? Guess I already told ya. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. If I'm stark raving rich like a man of iron, I might not be surprised to find that I might actually have the hard cold to follow an entire storyline. But would I really even need to read up on all those escapades? I mean, who needs such distractions when your sister's such a babe? But the downside is such a beast. Being shot up in a fun, be in the Middle East with a King Santo and soldier. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a major spoiler. Whoa, 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 whoa. What a major spoiler.
This podcast is copyright 2025 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.